about Wilds? You can't rank that, Cotton. You haven't even played it yet. But I want to. Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, I am pent up with enough concentrated hype to power an entire solar system while I do my best to stay spoiler-free for all things Monster Hunter Wilds, and a lot of that energy has gone towards thinking about the past of Monster Hunter rather than the future. With that in mind, with the days ticking down before Wilds release, I wanted to sit down and talk about my personal top 5 Monster Hunter games in the whole series. And before we begin, I feel it's really important to stress that this is entirely based on my own experiences. It is heavily biased, and of course, my order of experiencing the series to begin with has heavily colored my overall opinions of each of the games. And so if you disagree with my choices, rather than speak badly on the games that I have in my top 5, maybe instead tell me why your favorite games in the series are what they are, and why things are on your list that may not be on my own. Make more nice things be said about your favorite Monster Hunter games instead of more bad things said about mine. All that said, before we begin, I do want to give a very honorable mention to Monster Hunter 4U. For a lot of players, 4 and 4U were the pinnacle of Monster Hunter, the peak, and if I look at the series sort of chronologically and if I try to be objective about it, I fully agree that this game had some of the best new monsters, it had a genuinely fun story to follow along through even if it was a little bit shallow, and the endgame connected super well to the actual story too, making the whole sort of loop of the game more immersive as a result. On top of that, the game added 2 new weapon types that are both now beloved by the community, and it just had really solid gameplay in general too. That said, this is actually the most recent Monster Hunter game that I have played through fresh, so my first experience with most of the monsters had already happened before that, same with the weapons, and the thing is, I did quite enjoy my time playing the game for sure, but it just doesn't quite crack my own personal top 5 Monster Hunter experiences. That said, in 5th place, I've got Monster Hunter Stories 2. Yes, I'm putting a Stories game in here, fight me. Stories 1 was a little bit of quaint fun, but Stories 2 really expanded on pretty much every aspect of the game and became much deeper in a lot of ways. The story experience going through the game was honestly really fun, even though it was very Rathalos-centric as well, and while the gameplay is nothing close to what Monster Hunter is in the main series, it's completely different, it really goes to show that Monster Hunter can stand entirely on the design and charm of the creatures, rather than being purely about the gameplay. Sure, the gameplay of Monster Hunter is fantastic in the main series, but that's not the only reason that it's successful, and creating a game that doesn't even have that gameplay and having it be successful proves that. Stories, a monster catching game, relies entirely on how attached that you get to the monsters themselves as your allies, and then the rest of it sort of comes secondary. And I think the fact that Stories 2 was actually the first Monster Hunter game for a number of people is also quite an interesting thing to note here as well. By producing a game so outside the normal genre of the main series, they were able to reach a whole new audience and show them something that we all love, which is of course Monster Hunter itself. And Stories 2 was such a genuinely fun experience from the original playthrough that we did, all the way through the title updates and all that, and more than anything, it's just the fun that I had playing through the story of the game with Josh that made me enjoy this game enough to put it 5th on my personal list right here. Next up then we have Monster Hunter Frontier and all of its various expansions and updates and everything. It almost feels unfair to count Frontier as a singular game considering all of the content it got over its life cycle, but a couple of years back Josh and I played through every monster that Frontier has had. We did our best to go in sort of chronological order of their release, and as we progressed we started using things like extreme style weapons, things like tonfa, and even magnet spike, which was awesome too. There were around 80 large monsters that are neither from the main series nor have been brought into the main series, which are in Frontier, and that is an insanely large amount for a single game, and that's on top of new movesets generally being made for any main series monster that was returning in Frontier as well. There's a ton of social features as it was an MMO, there's over a decade of cosmetics, emotes that are fun, and just silly stuff to mess around with in general, and I mentioned the extreme style weapons and tonfa and magnet spike. Well, as someone who loves Monster Hunter combat and the differences between weapon types, I found all of these things absolutely fascinating. While not every large monster in Frontier is one of my favorites, the overall experience of getting to go basically one monster at a time through a roster that large that, even if they're a little bit odd perhaps sometimes, are definitely Monster Hunter monsters, it was just one of the best experiences that I have had in Monster Hunter. There's just no other way to put it. Then in 3rd place I've got Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate. This was essentially my second Monster Hunter game, as I started with base Monster Hunter World and then I played through all of GU when it released with Josh before Iceborne came out. And this was a very unique series for me. For those who haven't seen the Pro and noob episodes to put this into perspective, base Monster Hunter World was majorly fanged wyverns, flying wyverns, and elder dragons, with a couple of brutes and bird wyverns added in for flavor. They were all awesome monsters, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't until those first few hunts of Generations Ultimate that my mind truly sort of expanded, and I started to understand what monsters could actually be, the limits of the creativity, from Najarala being just a giant snake with limbs that would straight up coil around you, to giant enemy crab monsters that I loved from the very beginning, to then of course things like Zamtrios, who I fell in love with instantly, and Durambros, who has been my favorite monster for years, despite the fact that he hasn't been in the 5th generation games at all, and I didn't even play his original release game until years after he was already my favorite monster. A lot of my first experiences happened in Generations Ultimate, and regardless of anything else I could say about it, that is the reason that I hold it in such high regard, why I have it in the spot on my list. In hindsight, I love the concept of a Monster Hunter game that focuses on bringing back as many returning monsters as possible and updating their fights for a more modern version. And I honestly hope that we get another one in that style sooner rather than later, so we can have a more modern version of that same idea, as there are still tons of monsters that I'd like to see return in the new modern hunting formula that have not been brought back yet as of this point, at least to my knowledge, because I don't know anything about what's in Wilds. That said, while this was the game where I first learned how to hunt in the pre-World old school style, which was very awkward to adjust to after starting with World originally, I did find both the hunting styles and the hunter arts as concepts to be a really quirky and fun addition, making the game feel much more arcade-like, and not in a bad way either. And the fact that of course that these were just sort of a heavy inspiration for something in another Monster Hunter game that I haven't yet talked about adds a few extra points here too. Overall, I just have so many unforgettable memories in Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate that there's no way that I could have it lower on my own list. Moving on to second place for me today, I've got Rise and its Sunbreak expansion. This is the most recent entry in the series, and it was a game that I was truly addicted to right from the start. It was my first experience with a currently active Monster Hunter game on a portable system, and so I was invested in proper in-game farming, of course, and I could not get over just how easy it was to just do like 1 or 2 hunts on the go, having the option of playing while traveling, or hell, I played probably like over 100 hours in like the first couple of months after Rise came out, just sitting outside of my house, enjoying the fresh air in a chair outside while still playing the game on my Switch, and I loved that I could do that, and it got me really attached to the game really quickly. On top of that, the new monsters in Rise and Sunbreak were really top tier, specifically Gosharag and Raktakataki are some of my favorite monsters of all time, and they first entered the series in Monster Hunter Rise. And then of course the weapons themselves got some absolutely massive changes compared to previous games too, not only with moveset updates, especially for things like Hunting Horn, which became my new main in the game and functioned totally differently than it ever had before, but then also like the wire bug attacks and the switch skill system especially. There was a ton of actual customizable personality that you could have within each weapon, and as someone who generally just enjoys Monster Hunter combat as a whole, who generally ends up with multiple saved builds for each weapon type in each game, switch skills were like heaven to me in Monster Hunter. The thing that I love the most in Monster Hunter combat is variety and how different a hunt can feel against a monster with each weapon. Even if it's the same monster, if you have a different weapon, it feels completely different. And switch skills gave you that same sort of feeling, but within each of the weapon types as well. There were now multiple meaningfully different ways to play each weapon, and it essentially expanded the possible playstyles within Monster Hunter a massive amount as a result. So while Rise and Sunbreak weren't necessarily everyone's flavor of Monster Hunter, it definitely was one that I enjoyed the hell out of personally. That said, it's hard to beat your first Monster Hunter game. It always is, and mine was Monster Hunter World, of course with its Iceborne expansion coming later as well. Nothing can compare to my first story journey through baseline Monster Hunter World, learning just how wonderful this series could be, one little bit at a time, opening my heart up to it and ending up just becoming fully and totally invested in the future of the series much quicker than I could have ever anticipated. Obviously, my experience is biased significantly from it both being my first Monster Hunter game and from me going through the whole thing playing alongside Josh, who already had like over 10,000 hours across previous Monster Hunter games before this point too. This was an incredible experience for me the entire way through, and I had no idea what I was doing during that first playthrough. Once I reached the end game, Josh helped me learn to actually understand set building and more optimal uses of the weapons, but then as I started to understand how to do that, it also helped me branch out into sillier things, which is what I really wanted to do, because once you know how to maximize the offense of meta playstyles, you can then repurpose those ideas to maximize the offense of sillier playstyles until they become actually strong enough to be viable and usable, and that concept was exactly what hooked me on Monster Hunter in general. Then of course the Iceborne expansion and our playthrough through that was a magical experience for me as well. I personally love the guiding lands, even though it has early flaws before it was ironed out a little bit in further updates. And even though I have some gripes about Clutch Claw, the same ones as everyone else really, I still enjoyed the hell out of Iceborne's combat 100%. This game was my introduction to the series. I wouldn't be where I am today as a person without it, and even today, whether it's because of nostalgia or not, it just gives me such a feeling of pure joy to hunt in this game over 7 years after its initial release. That just about does it for today, and everyone. My top 5 Monster Hunter games, based on my own personal opinions and my own experiences with them, of course. As I said earlier, I'm sure everyone will have different lists. You will disagree with me, and some people may be upset that I even have stories on this list while relegating Monster Hunter for you to an honorable mention, but that's because of the order that I experienced things and just the place that I was at when I played them, really. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and I honestly really hope that if we come back to this list in a year, the top spot will be filled by Monster Hunter Wilds. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.